Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. I have a sample of swatches here. These are upholstery fabric. And this is the fabric that we're going to be using in our project today. So there are, how many are there? 3, 6, I think there's about 12 pieces. It should be enough to get us 3 bags. So the plan today is to make a boxy bag, but it's going to be a patchwork bag. So when you have samples like this that aren't really very big, but you're sick of making little tiny wallets or pouches, this is the way to put the pieces together, get something bigger happening, and use up even more of those swatches that we love to collect, or at least I love to collect anyway. So it's going to give me another option for products for the shop, and they look cute too. So here it is. That's one of the boxy bags. It's a patchwork boxy bag, and there's going to be a point of difference with this one to the other boxy bags that we usually do as well. So the fabric we've got at the front is that yellow and then that orangey burnt brown colour on the back as well. I've just gone and put a few different colours together to make up 3 bags. That's what we're going to work on today. The point of difference, that is no seam in the lining. So we've got an all-in-one lining piece, and rather than having the box corners finished on the inside, in which case we would need to have an opening in the fabric somewhere, we're doing French seams. So we've got French seam corners. You can also do bound corners if you want to instead. It'll be a lot easier. But anyway, that's what we're going to do today. French seamed box corners and building the fabric pieces together to make a big enough piece of fabric so that we can make this patchwork boxy bag. Let's get to it. So my samples have already been pulled apart. They've got this plastic coating on the back that you peel off, and then there's a layer of paper behind that, and you lose about an inch off the top and bottom end of your fabric by the time you've cut it all off. And what we're left with is this piece here. If you're making one bag, you only need to have 4 of those. I'll give you all of the dimensions in a moment. And look who's come to join me today. It's Coco. She's a bit lonely and lost with Chris and I doing our own jobs in our respective areas. Have you come to say hello? You going to come and have a nap with me? Well, I might have mine later. You want to sit and sew? Yeah? You lay down. She's adorable. All right, we're probably going to hear some snoring today once Coco gets going. This is also some upholstery fabric. It's just the really shiny stuff that you see at the back of some of your swatch samples. So I'm going to use those as my linings. I've got some Parlan. I like to use this as my stabilizer. It's a really lightweight fusible stabilizer. I do have this on my website if it's something that you want to try. So I've got lining, stabilizer. I've got some D-rings because I like to put those on the side just as a decorative feature for my tabs. I have my swatches, labels, double-sided tape, zip sliders, zipper tape, and I have a scrap of the webbing that I use on my bags as well. So any short off-cut bits I've put away, and I'll use those as my little tabs on the bags. And that should be about it. Let's get to it. So the first thing you want to do when you get samples like these, obviously, is to pull them apart. And then you want to decide which way you're going to lay them out or have them sitting in your bag. So I've been playing around with these this morning, trying to get an idea of what I actually wanted to do. I was going to do a great big, just a shoulder bag, but I've changed my mind. And so I've decided that these 4 pieces are going to go together in a boxy bag. And then I've done the same with the next 4. I just lay them out and rearrange the pieces until I'm happy with the colour layout. and sometimes you don't really get much choice. But I'm just thinking, since I do have another sample, I could possibly use some of those as well, but I'd like to leave that for something else. So there we go. That's one lot. That's the next bag. And then we have the next bag after that. So I've set everything else aside for the moment. I'm not going to cut my lining just yet because I don't know what size I need, and I don't need my stabilizer just yet either. So I'm going to use these 4 pieces. Lately I've been leaving these tags on because I've been making a lot of small zippered pouches, and I've been leaving these little tags on to remind me what colour they are, because when I put these products on my website I can never remember what colour to call these things. So I do keep them on for smaller projects, but we don't need a colour tag for these. So I'll just get rid of those. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is take these 2 pieces. I've got the longest side going this way, and place this piece over the top of this one. And it doesn't matter for now that these aren't the right size, because I can square all of that up later. So those 2 can go together and these 2 can go together. And if you're doing batch sewing, it's a good idea to put clips in on the side that you're actually going to be stitching. So I have everything ready for all of the bags that I'm going to be making today, and I'm going to sew down this side of all of these pairs of fabric. Seam allowance is completely up to you, but I generally do about 1/4 inch. I'm using a universal needle, which is a size 90 or 14, and the thread colour I'm using is grey. The grey thread tends to blend in really nicely when you've got lots of different colours to work with. Once you've sewn your pairs together, we need to top stitch. So you'll open out the fabric and decide which way you want to send the seam. And it really doesn't matter for this one. I'm going to pop my seam over to my right and I'll top stitch those layers in place. For the top stitching, I've increased my stitch length to 4. This is going to be the top section of the bag, and on the bottom section of the bag I want my top stitching to go to the opposite side, and the reason for that I will show you at the table later, is so that the seams lock into place more evenly. So when I flip this piece of fabric over, I'm going to move that seam over to the left instead of the right. So we want our seams in opposing directions. So I've got everything pointing toward the left. Bring that fabric over the top. Make sure that seam is on the left. And I'm going to top stitch this side now. And then I can just keep those 4 layers together for the moment, and I'll go and sew my other pieces. So we've sewn these 2 seams together along here. When we took it to the machine and did the top stitching, I didn't end the thread, I just continued straight on, and that way I could keep these layers of fabric together. And that's handy so that you know which way everything's supposed to go, but it's also really handy if you're doing batch sewing and you can keep your colour sequences together. So now that we have that, I'm going to trim that bit off. I don't usually do this for myself, but it'll be easier for you to see what I'm doing. So on this side, the seam is going to my left, and on this side, the seam is going to my right. Now we want to put these seams together and lock them together. So place this piece over the top, and where this seam has a ridge, you'll find the same on this side, and you'll place these ridges together and they'll actually lock in place. So if you get a clip, and just hold that in place for the moment, open it out, you'll see that this line here is in line with the next seam below it. So you're going to have that nicely squared up. From there, you're going to clip or pin it together, and we'll sew straight along there. Now, when I was sewing these pieces, I felt the fabric was shifting quite a bit, and you can see that here the grey seam comes out a fair bit, whereas the yellow seam is fairly straight. And the same things happened with most of my fabric pieces. So to prevent that from happening, I'm going to place some double-sided tape along the top edge. And that will just keep the layers of fabric together so that they don't shift. So that will stop the fabric from shifting as I stitch. All right, we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to sew along here, then we'll open that out and we'll top stitch. And this time round, it doesn't matter which way you want to go with that. Okay, now that we've got those 4 pieces ready, we've got our fabric piece all sorted to make our boxy bag. We need to fuse some stabiliser to the back of this. And you'll notice that I still haven't neatened up or evened out the edges yet. I'm going to do that when I cut the lining. So I've got a piece of Parlan or whatever stabiliser you want to use. And I've intentionally cut this a little bit bigger because this fabric spreads out so much that I just wanted to make sure I had every bit of it covered with the stabiliser. So I'll take this over to the heat press and I'll fuse all of that together, and I'll do the same for my other 2 bags. Alright, the stabiliser has been fused to the fabric, and I've gone and placed my labels onto the front of the bags, and now I need some lining. And I've intentionally not cut my lining out until this stage because there are so many changes with the fabric as you're sewing. For each individual person, your seam allowances might be 1 centimetre or 3/4 of an inch. For that reason, these might not be the same size as what I would give you in the materials list. There may be shrinkage when you iron it, and including myself, may even be inconsistent with the seams. So that's why when I do big projects like this, I do prefer to cut my lining out when I've finished up to this stage. So now it's time to cut the lining and square up the fabric. Now I'm using these stitching lines as my guide to squaring up the fabric because it's the straightest point. I can't rely on the fabric on the outside edge. So I'll use a straight line on the ruler and line that up on the straight edge of the fabric. And then I'm going to cut straight across. So it doesn't matter what size this piece of fabric is. So that is nice and straight. I'm going to carefully turn this around, and being a slippery fabric, it's not going to be that easy. And then I'm going to square up this side and I'll do the same. So I've got this straight edge here, but I've also got this straight edge here to line up. So once again, I've got the straight edge of one of my lines, and try and make that as straight as you can. And we'll cut all the way up here, cutting off the least amount of fabric that you need to so that you can get a nice clean edge. And we'll pivot that around again. And I'll continue with the cutting. This is so slippery. It has moved, but I can line that up. If the lining is a little bit smaller, it doesn't matter. So I've got my zipper tape, and I have a couple of sliders here as well. It doesn't matter whether you use a regular zip or the number 5 continuous. If you're going to use a regular zip, where I've got this one just sticking out a little bit, if you're going to use a regular zip, have one that's quite a bit longer. That way it's easier for you to work with the zipper tape. But for this one here, I'm going to use my double-sided tape, and this is a wash away tape, so it won't gum up my needles. And I'm going to grab my zipper tape and place that face down and line that up over the top edge of the fabric. And then we can remove the bottom section of the zipper tape. If you were using a regular zip, as I said, you would have it a lot longer and you would open it out all the way and just leave it sit there. But in this case, I'm going to pull that right off. I'm going to flip that around. We'll get some more tape. And we'll place this one with the zipper teeth faced down and line that up. We'll get some more tape, run that along the top edge, and then we can grab our lining. And there's no right or wrong side for this one, but you'll have the right sides facing, and line up the side edges with the side of your fabric and along the top. And then we'll flip that around the other way. And apply some more double-sided tape. And bring the other end of the lining up. Line up those side edges and the top. So now we can take this to the machine, and with the stabilised fabric faced up, we'll sew all the way down here and then down here as well. Put your zipper foot on to do that. Once we've done that, we'll turn this the right way out, and then we'll increase our stitch length for top stitching. So I'm going to have my zipper foot lined up really close to the edge of the zipper teeth, and I can feel that as I'm sewing along. And I'll flip it around, do the same on this side. And now that we can turn this the right way out. And you want the lining to be sitting behind the fabric, nice and evenly. Line up that side edge. And I'm going to top stitch probably about halfway between the top edge here and the bottom edge. If I go too close to the top, there's a lot of bulk in the fabric here, and it won't allow the lining fabric to sit very well. So it's much nicer to have your top stitching a little bit further away. And I'll just pull my lining taut underneath to make sure that it's not creating a crease at the top. And I broke a needle. I've decided to change back to my regular foot because the really narrow foot, my needle hit the end of the foot or the side of the foot. I'm not sure how that happened. I think there was just so much bulk in the fabric here that the needle deflected somehow and caused it to break. I'm going to do the other side now, and hopefully we don't have that trouble again. So I'm coming up to the intersection where the seams have been joined and there's a lot of bulk. This time around I'm going to hand crank it, so rather than going with my foot like a bat out of hell, I'll just turn this by hand a few times, and I'll actually go backward as well a few times. I know my finger's in the way on the reverse button there, and then I'll just go forward again until I get past all of that bulk and go on to the end. So that was a bit of a nuisance with the needle. Now when I changed my needle, I did actually upsize. I went up to the 110 or size 18 needle just to be safe. Now that we've done the top stitching, sewn the zip in place, we can actually put our sliders on. Where are they? We can grab those. I bring the fabric together with the right side facing up, and I'm going to line up this seam in the middle before I put my sliders on, because I want these sides to match up as well as I can get them. So keeping that lined up, I'm going to come up to this end here, and then I'm going to cut my zipper tape so that it's dead even at the top. The tape itself doesn't really matter, it's the teeth that I'm concerned about. Pop the slider on one side and just gently hold that in place whilst you put the other side on, and you want each side of the zipper tape to be nicely aligned. Push that in, you'll hear it click when it connects, and if your teeth at the top here are still straight, then you're going to have this nicely aligned without any kinks. So I'm pretty happy with that in the center there. Turn it around the other way. I'm going to move that slider up just so that I can get this really even at the top, and cut this side as well. And then I'll pop this slider on this side. If you're using a regular zip, you'll bypass this step because you'll only have the one slider. And if that's still nice and straight, then you're going to have zipper ends that meet up nicely and don't create a kink in the tape. So we'll bring that over to the center. We're going to leave this open about that much now. Then we're going to grab our tabs, and I'm just using some webbing, which is what I usually use for my bag handles. So if you wanted to, you could actually make crossbody straps or long shoulder straps and attach them to these tabs. So pop the D-ring over the top. That's one of the reasons why I like to add these to most of my bags now, is that it gives you more options. I'll just center that over the top of the zip there, and I'm not clipping this layer here, it's just the top section. Hold that in place, And we'll do the same for the other side. And once again, that's separate from the top. Let's take this to the machine and we'll sew up those ends there. So with the tab here, I'm going to place that face down onto the bed of my machine, take this top section out of the way, and I'm going to stitch through all of these layers from the inside of the bag. So the reason I've done that is because there's so many bulky layers of fabric here. It's actually easier to sew from the inside of the bag than it is to sew over those teeth on the outside. We'll turn around and do the other side, so we'll move that out of the way. Make sure if you've got a D-ring on it that it's facing away from where you're sewing. So what we've done here is secured the tabs to the end of our bag, but we've also secured the end of the zip. So this way, when we turn the fabric the wrong way out, none of it's going to come apart. So make sure you've got your bag open. Bring the lining to the outside and also the outer fabric. We want to separate those. The centre of our fabric is where the seam is at the bottom here. So we can line that up with the centre of our zip and clip those edges together. We'll do the same at the other end. If you want to, you can also go and sew across here, but I'll do that later with a black thread, and that will keep the D-ring from sliding down. It's no big deal. It can flop about if it wants to. Line up that centre with the centre of our zipper teeth. Alright, that's nice and even over that side. We'll flip this around and we're going to place the lining over the top and line up the sides of the lining so that they're evenly placed with the outer fabric. And we'll repeat for the other end. So you don't have to find the centre of this piece because you want to line it up with the side edges. And we don't need to leave an opening in this bag because we're doing those French seams. Okay, that's ready to be sewn. So we're going to take that back to the machine and sew down both these short edges. So there's a lot of bulk here. You've got the zip, the 2 layers of the tab, plus you've got the fabric and the lining. So you do want to go really slowly across here. And if you are concerned at all, just hand crank as well. It might be the easiest thing to do. Now we're going to be cutting off a section for the corner here, and we're actually going to be turning this bag through the box corner. So the best thing to do here is to actually, at least on one side, is just go and double stitch, because we will cut this off here. That'll unravel the threads. So if you do another row of stitching, that'll give you a little bit of extra support. And I'll do the same on the other side because I know I'll forget which side I've double stitched. Now that we've done that, It looks as though there is no possible way of turning this bag out, but we're going to go through the box corner. So what we're going to do now is mark our corners. Now normally I might go 2 inches or 5 centimetres for a bag of this size, but because of the next 2 steps I'm going to go slightly smaller, and I think I'll make this 4.5 centimetres or 1 3/4 inches. It's important to measure from the stitching line because we all have different stitching lines or seam allowances, and you'll get a proper boxed corner if you measure from the stitching line and the folded edge. So 4.5 centimetres or 1 3/4 inches, and the same from the fold at the bottom, and we'll do that on all 4 corners. And again we're measuring from the stitching line. And once you've done that, you can cut those corners out, and we're going to cut through all the layers. And we can trim the excess off the side here. And find the side that you have reinforced. So I've double stitched both, but I've double stitched or triple stitched down here. Now we're going to turn this bag through from the boxed corner. If you don't like that idea, then what you can do is slit this open along here, and you can close this up again later and then just turn your bag through. But we're going to go through the box corner. It's surprising how much fabric you can actually fit through here. So I'll put my fingers in, and I'm going to come down to this side and just reach in and grab this end. I'm just also going to open the zip sliders whilst I'm in there, and you can do that from either side. So I'll just reach in and grab this corner here and pull that through this side. All right, so you can see the corners have been cut out on the sides there, or on the corners. I've got the other one here as well, and just in case you don't like the idea of doing French seams on something so thick, I'll give you another option first. What you will do is turn your bag inside out, line up your corners with the lining and the outer fabric, and you'll clip the edges together, sew straight across there, and then you can attach a binding to the corners instead. So rather than having to have bindings on the sides and then on the box corners, you can just have it on these corners. We're going to do French seams because we want to make our life a little bit more difficult. So I'll put that aside and we'll start our French seams. So it's probably not very practical on a thick bag like this, but it's going to have the same effect as what bindings does, in the sense that it's actually going to give the bag more support on the side. So you want to make sure that the lining here is lined up with the outer fabric, and if your lining tends to fall a little bit short, you can pull it up on the sides, because you do want this to be sitting equally with the outer fabric. And if it doesn't, you'll have to increase the size of your seam allowance, because when we turn this around shortly, if you have, say, this much of a gap between your lining and your fabric, you're not going to catch that when we sew across here, and therefore doing the French seam, you're not going to have neat seams either. So you want to make sure that bit of lining is actually sitting up in line with the outer fabric. It doesn't faze me if it sits out a little bit too far. Okay, so that lining and the outer fabric have been secured together, and you'll do the same for all 4 sides. Once you've done that, we're going to take this back to the machine and we're going to stitch across all 4 of those corners. I wish I hadn't used this lining, it's so slippery. All right, we're now ready to sew up those corners. So stitch straight across there on all 4 sides. And just double check that you have actually caught the lining as well as your outer fabric. And you can do that by having a look on the inside and making sure that there are no frayed edges sticking out. So now that you've sewn those corners up, before we go on to the next step, you want to just have a peek inside and make sure all of those seams have been caught, because at this point we don't want any frayed edges. And if there are, then just go in and make your seam allowance a little bit bigger. Okay, those are all okay. What we need to do now is trim this fabric back. So we're going to halve that seam allowance that we have. And we'll do that for all 4 corners. Okay, before we turn this around the wrong way, I just want to show you all the layers that you've got here. So you've got the outer fabric, the lining sandwiched in between there. You've also got the fold of the seam along here. So you've got lots and lots of layers right in the center. And when we turn this the wrong way out, this is the area that's going to give you pause for concern, I guess. You don't want to break your needle, but it might just be a little bit more difficult in that position there. So let's turn this the wrong way out. And had we not wanted to do French seams, you would have this raw edge on the inside of the bag, and you would just go and put a binding on that now, and then you'd be finished. But no, I'm here to torture you, so let's go one step further. So we've got the seam pushed out on the end there, and you just want to roll that so that you can get as much of that seam tucked in as you can. And this fabric is the worst to sew with. The outer fabric's fantastic, but the lining is kind of like that shiny curtain material, and it's slippery. The needle doesn't like going through it. And now what you need to do is feel that bump that you've got in the fabric. So the raw edges that I have from the fabric on the other side sit around about here. So I'm going to be stitching somewhere on this side, as close as I can get to that fold or to that lump underneath. So just keep poking those corners out. Doing French seams like this on box corners is much easier on quilting fabric. I think I'm being a little bit ambitious with this. Okay, let's go and sew this up. So I'll sew straight across. I'll actually double stitch this because there are so many layers there that I just like it a little bit more secure. All right, there might be a bit of teeth clenching here as you go through all of those layers, but we'll get there. My thread broke, so I'm just going to turn it over and go from the other side. So that's one side done. We'll go and do the other three. Before we go and double stitch these corners, just have a peek inside and make sure all of those edges are nice and neat, that you've caught everything, and once you're happy with that, then you can go and double stitch. And now we are completely finished. Okay, here we are, all done. So there's the seam that we have on the box corners, and everything is nice and neat. I actually like this technique, or especially not having a seam at the bottom of the lining, and using the shiny lining makes the bag look a lot more elegant too. It's just horrible stuff to work with. Now let's turn this bag the right way out. And whilst nobody was looking, I've gone and changed my thread colour and sewn the tab closer to the D-ring so that it stays at the end there. No real reason for doing it other than that's what I wanted. So poke out your corners. By doing these French seams, or even binding your seams or your box corners, it's actually going to help your bag sit nicely, whereas normally it would flop easily. I've got a couple of little pulls to put on the zips. Just makes it a little bit easier for the user to open and close the bag. So there we go, a patchwork boxy bag with French seams. And here are the other two that I've made as well. I think they've come up really well with that fabric. Cute. So didn't they turn out well? Admittedly the French seams were really tedious. I do like French seams on clothes, and I like French seams on fabric that is a lot lighter, like your quilting cottons and your voiles. So if I were to do a boxy bag like this again, I wouldn't do French seams. If I wanted more stability across here, I would do bound corners, so you don't have to go and bind the side as well as the corners. You can just get away with doing the corners, and it leaves for a much nicer finish on the inside of the bag because you don't have any exposed seams in there. I love this lining on the inside. It's actually a really nice fabric to have as linings on the inside of your bag, but it's so horrible to work with. It frays really easily. It makes a mess, and I do find that the needle tends to break threads a fair bit, because if you're going too fast, I think the nylon or the polyester in the fabric perhaps helps it to break or burn or whatever. I think I must just sew too fast. I don't really think so. But yeah, it's a nice bag. I wouldn't do the French seams for something of this thickness in the fabric was just a little bit too much, but it still turned out fine anyway. I'm going to put these in the shop. I'll end up putting them on my website as well. I wasn't sure if I was going to do the other samples that I've still got, but I might leave that for another day. I don't know. What do you think? Should I use up those samples and make up the rest of the bags? These are the colours that we've got. So we've got the yellow and grey with the rust and grey on the other side. Then I've got shades of blue with green and grey. And then I've got a kind of a green with shades of grey on the other side. So yeah, they turned out nice. Let me know if you think I should use up the rest of the samples without French seams, though. I might actually just bind the corners. Yeah, so they're going on my website and in the shop. I think I'll probably price them at $45 to $50 each. One of the reasons I like doing the little D-rings on the side, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is because it allows people to put a handle on the side. So if you wanted to have a crossbody strap or a shoulder strap, then you could carry the bag like that. I mean, you can apply all of the techniques you've learnt in here and make this bag much thinner and longer. So then you can have this as a nice crossbody bag or something like that. So there's plenty of options with those sample swatch fabrics. Just build all the fabric back up again and make something else with it. Doesn't have to be a tiny bag. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.